Hello, I'm Doug Langenfelder, Vice President of Chapter 221, Air and Space Forces Association, here in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And behind me is a Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. It's a replica of the aircraft that Buzz Wagner flew in the beginning of World War II. This memorial was designed to represent Buzz Wagner's bravery at a time when our nation was in a very dark place. So, who is Buzz Wagner? What did he represent to people? And why is he the namesake of Chapter 221? Come join me as we explore these questions.
So I'm sitting here and you can see behind me, I can't see it, which is why I didn't think to say it sooner. You see spread out the city of Johnstown. The city of Johnstown is a very special city. If you've never been here, please come. We are actually at the top of the hill. The steepest inclined plane in the world is here, and we're very proud of it. It was built after our first flood. Now, if you have heard of Johnstown, it's more likely that the way you've heard of Johnstown is the Johnstown flood. Well, there were three of them in the last 150 years. The first one and the most famous one, that's mostly on Jeopardy, was in 1889. In that flood, there are books about it. David McCullough wrote the first one, most comprehensive one, the Johnstown flood, and that was his first book, by the way. And he came and researched a great deal and was still able to do a few interviews. We have a flood museum downtown, and the National Park Service has a flood museum up at the South Fork Dam.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Marty Kuhar, and I'm the Veterans Coordinator here at the First Summit Arena at the Cambria County War Memorial Hall of Fame. And with that in mind, I'd like to just give you somewhat of a tour of what we have here in the arena. And, and I think what we're talking primarily about is how Cambria County and the state of Pennsylvania has supported everything in our nation from the Revolutionary War on. In our case, the War Memorial here pretty much talks about everything from World War I on. So, for example, they say that over the time of our nation, we've had over 1,350,000 people killed in action. In our case, Cambria County, we have 1,223 members of our county that have given their lives for this defense. And I'm standing right now in front of the 201 of the World War I veterans who gave their life to the cause of this country. And if you could, also in the background, right next to our World War II casualty list, is also the awards for anything from service to courage, and including certainly the awarding of the Medal of Honor to, in our case, Cambria County has given 8 of our finest citizens for the Medal of Honor, 6 during the Civil War and 2 during World War II. And also, if you'll notice the second line of valor, which would be the Distinguished Service Cross for the Army and the Army Air Forces, and the Navy Cross for the Navy and the Marine Corps the Marine Corps is the Distinguished Service Cross or the Navy Cross. I think it's important to note that in Cambria County, we have 26 bridges named after veterans. 26 named after veterans throughout Cambria County. And with that in mind, we have 2 more that's in the works. They haven't been dedicated as yet, and I'm sure there'll be more in the future. We have another plaque here that notes that we had 49 prisoners of war, that we're aware of. And again, we only know what people give to us. I would like to talk a bit about our Military Hall of Fame, because it's the one military Hall of Fame that is extremely tough to get into. So with that, we only have a ceremony maybe once every couple of years. And right now we have 62 members of the Hall of Fame. And it's probably our 2 most famous. We got Sergeant Michael Strank from the small town of Franklin, who was the squad leader who led and raised the flag of Mount Suribachi during Iwo Jima on February 23rd, 1945. And of course, it was taken by Joe Rosenthal, which became the most photographed photo throughout not only World War II, but throughout the world. Also, I think it's important to note that we have Admiral Perry from Crescent, Pennsylvania, who at this point is well known as the person who first reached the geographic North Pole in 1909. And of course, probably our other most famous individual is at the time Lieutenant Colonel Buzz Wagner.
When I was born, Buzz had already been killed for 2 months. And so I learned from my grandparents about all of his exploits and how everybody in the complete area of Cambria County, Johnstown, Somerset County, and probably most of the East Coast were very, very upset about Buzz losing his life.
From a very early age, hearing family accounts and of his accomplishments during World War II, and also I looked at the many scrapbooks of articles and photographs and other memorabilia that my family had, specifically my grandparents, which are my mother's parents and were his parents. So from a very early age, I became aware that he was indeed somebody special. He had made a huge contribution during the war. But aside from that, and the pictures and the personal family accounts, I really had no idea of him as an individual, as his feelings as to what he did until several years later when I did some of my own personal research and found out a little more about him.
I first learned about Buzz Wagner because if you're from Johnstown, and specifically if you're anyone related to the Air Force or the military, I've always known who Buzz Wagner was. We knew what his picture looked like. So when I realized that the Air Force Association here in Johnstown was named for Buzz Wagner and all he had done, and frankly, I learned much more as an adult and probably paying more attention as an adult than I knew as a child about his story, where he was born, where he went to high school in Nantiglow, when his family moved to Johnstown to Irene Street, and then when he entered the service in 1939, well before the war, which is why he was in a position to, after having attended the University of Pittsburgh and knowing a whole lot about aeronautics, was, I'm sure, helpful in his ability, his incredible ability to fly that plane.
Just the fact that Buzz studied aeronautical engineering, every person that knew him that I spoke with claimed that absolutely helped him become an ace. Because as a matter of fact, Joe Moore told me the story. He said when they got their first P-40s, Buzz actually went out with his crew chief and glued tufts of yarn all over the wings. And then he would go up and max perform the airplane and watch the wings to see where the airplane would stall. And he would know that by watching how the yarn on the wings would perform. And so the fact that he was an aeronautical engineer set him up, I think, to be a great pilot. As Joe Moore said, he was probably the best pilot he ever knew.
This guy was the man's man. He was the hero's hero. He was an aeronautical engineer. He knew a lot about aerodynamics, and the P-40 had its faults naturally.
All too often, I think in today's Air Force, we think of, for example, a squadron commander. You got to be a lieutenant colonel to be a squadron commander. Buzz was a first lieutenant squadron commander in the Philippines. First lieutenant. And that kind of matches up with some of my experiences that if you give some junior folks, junior enlisted folks or junior officers the opportunity to excel, they will absolutely amaze you. Absolutely amaze you. And so I think to me, that's a major lesson that I looked at as, good gosh, the first Army Air Force's ace of World War II was a first lieutenant squadron commander in the Philippines. So I think that is a true lesson. I think Buzz's education is a lesson for all of us. He never finished his aero engineering degree. I think he went to the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown for 3 years.
It is because of the influence of what I learned about him from a very early age, spending my summers with my grandparents, his parents, and looking at all the memorabilia I shared with you a moment ago, that I was also influenced to go into the military, that I wanted to go in and be in the Air Force, and I wanted to fly if possible. All that came to pass. Everyone in our crew was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. To me, that was especially significant because it was 30 years before that my uncle, Buzz Wagner, had also been awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross.
My interest in Buzz started as a little kid. My grandmother lived just a few miles from the Johnstown airport, and she had 3 pictures on her wall. And I would go over there and sit on the floor and, play. And I'd look up at these 3 pictures. And one was FDR, because she was a lifelong Democrat. And FDR, in her view, saved the nation. The other was John F. Kennedy, and she admired him. And then the other picture was the picture that we all see of Buzz Wagner in his service dress uniform. And I remember asking her and my grandfather about the picture. And of course, they repeated all the rumors, that Buzz had crashed in a swamp and he'd been eaten by an alligator in Florida, or the Japanese sabotaged his airplane and he'd crashed and not survived. But I heard all these stories growing up, and I knew that he was the first ace of the first Army Air Force's ace of World War II. Not the first American ace. That's often a rumor that's repeated, but there were Americans that flew for the Eagle Squadron in the RAF, and there were some aces with the Eagle Squadron. So Bud was not the first American ace. He was the first uniformed ace of the American services.
What has to be, I think, remarked is to put his accomplishments in context. As we said earlier, our freedom throughout the history of our nation has always been threatened from time to time, and there have always been people who come forward and have done what is necessary to protect our security. Those people are national heroes, and he is one of them.
He really gave the nation hope at a time when things were just so dark, and especially the people in Johnstown. I mean, Johnstown was a city of about 275,000 then. Steel workers, coal miners, hardworking folks. A lot of those folks were Europeans, Eastern Europeans. They wanted to be Americans. And here's Buzz Wagner with a German last name who ends up, being a hero from Johnstown and showing Americans that we could beat the Japanese. We didn't think we could up to a certain point. And Buzz showed we could beat the Japanese. And I think that gave Johnstown a lot of pride, and I think that pride continues today.
It is really important, I think, that his accomplishments and legacy be promoted in public awareness. And I think that's the only way future generations are going to learn about what he did and why we today still have to be vigilant and take the actions necessary to protect our freedom. I think what all this boils down to is he in the past has been a point of pride, a source of pride for our nation, all the way back to what we're talking about more than 70 years ago to us currently, but also he could be the same thing for future generations.
A lot of the people in the community, the younger people probably, don't know the story, and it's a fascinating story. He was a legend, a local hero, an ace.
In 2007, I received a phone call from, I've gotten to know him very well now, another resident of the Air and Space Force chapter in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. His name is Colonel Retired Jim Moschott, who had been doing research on Buzz Wagner for many years and was writing a book. He called, and at that time, I and my family were living in the Washington, D.C. area. He called and introduced himself to me, told him what I just shared with you, and said that he would be there on business the next couple of days. Could he please come out and visit? I said, certainly, come on out. Well, we had a very good visit, and afterward, I was so convinced of the goodness of what he was doing that I asked him if he would be interested in all of the memorabilia of Buzz Wagner that I had inherited from my family. And he said he would. I said, there's a proviso with this, that in the way of your choice, the way you think is appropriate, make it available for public viewing. So with the exception of a few articles of Buzz Wagner's, which were donated and are currently on display at the Air Force Museum in Ohio, the next year, Jim Moshcott, I got another phone call from him. I stayed in touch with him over the next several months, providing him information about Buzz Wagner's family and so forth. I got a call from him in 2008. He said, "You will not believe where I am right now." I said, "Probably not. Tell me." He said, I have found, after all the searching he had done, the crash site of Buzz Wagner, which is located today on Eglin Air Force Base in the Panhandle of Florida.
And the more I thought about it, I thought if I could go down to Eglin in that area and find his crash site, maybe I could add something to the history. So I went online and actually got a copy of the accident report, which was on microfilm at the time. And it also was very sketchy. The location of the crash site it gave narrowed it down to about a 10 square mile area. And so my wife, Becky, and I decided that we would go down to Florida about once a month, starting in about the 2003, 2004 timeframe. And we would look for the crash site to see what we could find. And no kidding, we'd pile in the car every Friday afternoon, once a month. We'd drive down to Eglin. We'd stay at Mid-Bay Shores, which is a resort area right down there on the shore. And we would go out and tromp around in swamps looking for this crash site. And it was frustrating because we looked for 3.5 years, and we found cattle pens, and we found rusted farm implements, and we found holes in the ground, and but we never found the crash site. So one day I ran into an older gentleman who was, I think he was 12 years old at the time. And he and I started talking. He says, I think I remember that. I think I was a kid. I was hunting squirrels with my uncle. And I remember coming across the Air Force accident team that was removing the airplane from the ground. And he said, "I think I can show you where that is." He said, "It's all changed over time now. At the time, it was private land. Now it's part of the Eglin Reserve." And he said, "I think I can show you." So we piled into his pickup truck. He lived up near Defuniak Springs. And he drove us down. We parked his pickup truck, and he walked us out. And he said, "I can't tell you exactly where it is, but if you look in this wedged area here, I think you'll find it." So lo and behold, I thought, my gosh, I'm onto something now. I'm going to find it. I had my metal detector. I gridded off the area. I went back and forth like I was cutting the lawn in this area. And I looked and I looked and I looked, and I just couldn't find it. And it was Sunday afternoon. We had to head back to Maxwell. It was early 2008. And I remember being frustrated. And I just remember thinking, no kidding. I remember I even said it out loud. I said, "Buzz, I'm just trying to tell your story. Can you help me out here?" And no kidding, I look off to my right, and there's this beam of light coming down through the trees. And where the beam of light was hitting, and this is no kidding, there is a circular, shallow depression in the ground. And I walked over with my metal detector, and I got a hit, and I put my little tool in, and I popped out a piece of twisted aluminum that had olive drab paint on it. And bingo, I thought, I think I've got it.
And he said, "I'm standing there. We've dug down and excavated a lot, and we found many parts because when the airplane crashed, it went deep into the ground. I found a lot, and we went down many feet on all sides of the crash site." And he said, "I found human remains." I said, "Oh my goodness." I said, "I wonder what's buried up at the cemetery in Johnstown, Pennsylvania." Well, of course, we didn't know the answer to that, but it certainly was not all of it. So we talked about it, and Jim, before he left, he got what he did. He turned it over to the authorities, base authorities at Eglin Air Force Base, and he went back to where he came from. That was the first of many visits.
You dug down to found the engine, also found the Buzz's wristwatch, high school ring.
The class ring from Buzz was from Naniglow High School, because he grew up in Naniglow before his parents came to Johnstown. And so the class ring, it's quite neat to see, as I've seen it, and to watch at the time the crash happened. stopped exactly when he was killed.
And where the repatriation comes in, they did find some more remains of Buzz in there. So that constituted a repatriation. Those remains had to be buried.
I, though, wrote a letter to the base commander there, identifying myself, and said, here's what Jim Moshcott had just given your organization. I'm not sure how to proceed or what to do with all that. And I got a real fine response from this base commander. He said, Boyd, we have taken all those remains. Our medical community has turned them over to the Joint Prisoner of War Missing in Action Accounting Command in Hawaii. And they will use those remains and try to validate their identity as being Buzz Wagner's. I was asked to provide a DNA sample. I did. Shortly thereafter, I received word that proved that the remains they had were indeed of Buzz Wagner. And they said, what would you like to do with these? I said, what are the options? Anyway, the remains were cremated and held there while we figured out what to do. And I had no idea, so I was around Washington, D.C., and I called the Johnstown, Pennsylvania chapter of the Air and Space Force Association. I said, here's who I am, here's what's just transpired, I don't know what to do, can you give any guidance? And that chapter very graciously picked up the whole ball, put together a complete what they call a repatriation ceremony, where they take additional remains to put them with something that's already been interred. And that to me and my family meant so much. One of the greatest and most useful things I believe they put together was a full-time replica of the P-40 fighter aircraft that he flew.
For some crazy reason, I was surfing the internet and whatever and saw this ad for a for sale for a P-40 replica. It wasn't completed. A fellow in Memphis, Tennessee, Jack Landry, was contracted to build a replica for the Flying Tiger Association. I think they were out in Washington State somewhere. Well, whatever happened, the plans fell through, and he had the aircraft almost completely done, and he put it on the internet for sale. Well, I took that information back to our next chapter meeting, and surprisingly enough, we all agreed that maybe we should go for that.
They really wanted to get it done, and when Bob contacted me, I had the rear fuselage from the firewall to tail done. The tail was largely done. The cowling made out of fiberglass was in process, and I had gotten a set of wings from a Twin Beach and was modifying those. It's the same principle that they used building the replicas for the movie Tora 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 in 1970. My friend Jim Delaney had already built a propeller for it. I don't have all these metal formers and stretchers and all this really specialized equipment. So the accelerated time frame started to put me in a position to where I didn't have all of these things, and I was faced with having to fabricate just a lot of stuff. But then I enjoy that type of work anyway, so it's something that I wasn't upset about having to hurry about it. I was excited and glad to be able to build such a project. We wouldn't want to use an original wing on something that was going to go into go on display on a pole outside or even inside. There are guys that rebuild these aircraft to actually fly, and it would be much more usable to those people. So we would not have done that. The wings came from a Twin Beach, but they were pretty rough, and so a lot of that had to be redone and modified to do what we wanted to do. Building it at home wasn't too much of a problem. I added onto my garage, which helped considerably, and the fuselage was very, very light. So 2 people could pick it up very easily. Things weighed in at about 150 pounds each. So that's pretty light. I had a lot of money in materials naturally, being built out of aluminum. Even 6061 T6 for the bulkheads and some of the bigger fittings is not cheap. So it just over time, I never kept receipts on it, but I started to pile up some time and money into it. The labor is, I would say overall, probably about 2,000 hours. That last year, we worked on it 7 days a week. That's me, my wife helping sometimes with the riveting, my kids helping. And so I would come home from work, eat, and then go right out there and start working on it. Where I worked on aircraft, my daily job, they had just hired a new mechanic, a young woman named Shelby Simone. And she was probably 22 years old, just got out of A&P school. And we were talking about it one day at work, and she said, well, I would love to help with that. But it really is a symbol of the underdog. It's really the Rocky of all of the World War II vintage aircraft.
So we had to start a fundraiser. You know, we're a small chapter, so we had a lot of money to raise. I believe $35,000 was the price for the final negotiated price for the P-40 replica. Jim Kirkstad, chapter secretary or chapter treasurer at the time, and he developed different fundraising programs, and we did all sorts of different fundraisers, and a lot of the corporations, helped us out a lot.
We have also gotten help from concurring technologies. Now, the biggest thing that I can remember is when we started our campaign to get the P-40 brought here to Johnstown, we contacted a company that made lapel pins, a P-40 lapel.
So we sold these replicas of his P-40, and it says Buzz Wagner on it, and we wear it whenever we can.
We also have a program for fundraising. We're always looking for funds. And we came to develop a project where we have a memorial brick walkway, a pathway with a bench honoring veterans, where we're able to sell the bricks, families can buy them, and they're engraved with the name of the service member, present or past, and it's been a very good project for us.
We've gotten different businesses and associations from the Johnstown, Cambria County, Somerset County area, different people wanting to be a part of not only the airplane that's sitting out here at the airport, but the walk. They add the names to the walk. We just got 15 more names that will engrave on the bricks, and we'll place them out there after the weather clears.
One of the big things that I was associated with and excited about, they already had in place, they were working on the replica of Buzz's plane to go and be installed up at the airport. And we got to finalize that. I was there the day that it finally came in pieces.
January of 2010, I believe, was when the P-40 was shipped from Memphis, Tennessee to the Johnstown airport.
It was a brisk winter day. It was miserable, and we were trying to get this thing off of the tractor and trailer when it first arrived here at the airport. We successfully did that with the help of the airport maintenance people and their forklift and things, and got it into one of the hangars here where we were given permission where we could assemble it. Later on was time for assembly, and I was asked to be a part of the assembly process. I've worked with heavy machinery and things all my life, so I had some skill set to offer. I came over and we had a forklift, we had a fuselage, and we had a wing section. And the intention was to use the forklift to place the fuselage down into the wing section. But if you know the dynamics of how a plane is constructed, it's difficult to get forks into where you need them to be. So after much constellation and consternation and thinking about it and trying to figure out how we're going to do this, I told one of the fellows to please keep an eye on the door. We got a chain block, and we threw a chain block up over the rafters of the hangar, and I told the guys, I said, let's just watch and make sure the paint doesn't crack off the beams. Then we'll know that we've stressed it out too much. And we hoisted it up with a chain hoist and lowered it down into the wings and took it off before anybody knew that we had used the the structure of the hangar to put this together. I think it was about a week later, we had a crane come in. I was absent for that, but heard all the stories. Big bolts, big wrenches, people that don't normally turn big bolts and big wrenches, but it all came together very well, and it turned out to be a wonderful, wonderful project, and it's known through the community for, it's sort of the pride of the community up here for the airport.
When we had the memorial up here of putting the P-40 at the airport, we had Civil Air Patrol was here also, along with the VFW honor squad, and there were some members here from other chapters that came in from Altoona, came in. There was a group from Pittsburgh that sent us a nice donation. They've helped a lot. They've set up booths and to tell everybody about what the Civil Air Patrol does, and they also had brochures on Buzz Wagner and the Air Force Association, and they passed those out also.
It is on display at the regional airport in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and anybody, whether they know anything about Buzz Wagner or not, cannot avoid seeing this when they get to the airport. It's just impossible not to see it and look at it. And of course, the hope is, and it's already turned out to be this way, people will say, what is that? Tell me about it. And that then provides an opportunity to talk about Buzz Wagner, his legacy, and what it means for our current and future national defense, which is great. And then the local chapter of the Air and Space Force Association has also made a little museum inside the terminal of memorabilia for him, and that serves the same purpose. So I'm not only a very proud nephew, Buzz Wagner has obviously influenced my life and my choice of career. He's influenced my thinking from a very early age, and I'm grateful for all that.
A local sculptor from Nannylow, Tom Bitchko. He was a local resident that was following, Buzz's exploits, and of course he's younger than that, but he's also interested in history, and he sculpted some bronze busts for Veterans Day a few years ago. So there's one in our display here at the airport. There's one down at the War Memorial Museum.
The weather up here is really, at times pretty rough on the plane.
We did have to make some rather major repairs here this last summer, replacing, reconstructing the rudder, which was blown off during a windstorm.
The plane is simply sitting there, being exposed to the weather. We have snow, we have hail, we have all the things that sometimes an occasional bird that wants to get into some place in the cockpit area that maybe we didn't seal up properly or something that's come loose. We have to be careful with it all the time to make sure that it's maintained. And what we'll be doing here in the next couple of months, we already have a plan for restoring some of the decals, some paint work, tightening up things, and landscaping the area, just sprucing it up and keeping it fresh at all times.
One of the proudest moments I had with regard to honoring my uncle was what the Air and the Space Force chapter in Johnstown, Pennsylvania did many years ago. That was the repatriation of additional remains which became available that had to be put with those that were already at the burial site at the cemetery.
The original interment of Buzz happened in January of 1943. I was born in February of 43. There was over 250,000 people came to Grandview Cemetery for the funeral service. And we had a reinterment of Buzz's remains in October 2010.
The chapter put together a very, very impressive, they call it a repatriation ceremony, and it was very proud for me to participate in that.
We designed and put together a repatriation ceremony at Grandview Cemetery at Buzz's gravesite, and that was quite a nice operation we had. We had a lot of military units there from all over the state and locally. Buzz never had a flyover for his original funeral.
We didn't have the 250,000 people, but we had a nice turnout. There was probably a couple hundred people. We had the Air Force. As a matter of fact, 2 of the F-15s did the flyover, which Buzz never had because of the weather at the time they buried him was not conducive to having a flyover. The 2 F-15s really shook us up when they came over.
At the reception afterward, I was asked to make a couple of comments. And in preparation for that, I thought, sure, I'll do that. It was not until I began to prepare that I realized how significant his accomplishments really were. And I was humbled to try to adequately express my impression of what he was, so I could convey that to other people. But that event to me was the highlight of my personal recognition of him and being involved with him.
I always wonder if he would have lived, how high he would have gone.
It's been more than 80 years since Buzz Wagner lost his life in the plane crash. Time has carried on, but so has the bravery and the dedication that Buzz Wagner showed during that time. It continued through World War II and beyond in everyone who served our nation. His life is remembered by those who gathered to lay Buzz to rest, who spent time to discover Buzz's story, who worked tirelessly to build a memorial, and by those who told his story. On behalf of Chapter 221, United States Air and Space Forces Association, thank you for spending some time with us today. God bless you.